gonna get started. 2 days down, two to go, day three. And uh, we are starting off with a very important, underrepresented, uh, under-discussed topic of Sudan this morning. This is something this conference actually hasn't dealt with much in this conference in the world. I think need to focus more on Sudan because the silences are deafening with it. And when you can see sites of slaughter from space and the ongoing destruction, that speaks for itself. So I'm glad we have an opportunity to hear from a survivor this morning. I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague, wonderful colleague, Kate Timoni, who's going to introduce our speaker this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Langell. I really appreciate the lovely introduction, and thank you to all of you, both who are attending online and who are here in person. So it's my distinct honor to introduce our speaker this morning. So Tarteel Alimam is a Sudanese humanitarian advocate, writer, digital storyteller, and community organizer dedicated to amplifying voices impacted by war and displacement. Born in Omdurman, she uses storytelling and grassroots advocacy to shed light on Sudan's ongoing genocide and the world's largest displacement crisis. The way that we're going to proceed this morning is that Tarteel will have about 40 minutes that she'll probably be speaking, and then we'll have some time for a question and answer. So without further ado, I welcome you to the podium, Tarteel.
Thank you. Good morning. Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here with each and every one of you. Today marks the 3-year anniversary since the war began in Sudan, so it's an especially emotional and difficult day for me, but even so more important that I'm here today speaking about my country, about the pain, the suffering, and the ways that and responsibilities that each and every one of us has towards Sudan. I'm going to begin with a poem. Sudanese people are writers, poets. My grandfather, growing up, would always speak to me in poetry. We would sit down on Fridays, write poetry together, and it became ingrained in me, not only as an art and an expression, but as a way to process my feelings and to be able to speak about the atrocities and the pain and the joy and the laughter and the things that make me feel so deeply. This poem will be both in English and in Arabic to honor both homelands. It's been more than 1,000 days of violence in my once vibrant Sudan. That's 156 weeks of war since this nightmare began. That's 36 months of 12 million people displaced. That's generations of hard work and labor simply erased. اتشردنا من بيوتنا بقينا بلا مقام لا أمان لا وطن حتى الحلم بقى حطام. That's my family home broken into. That's memories of where I was raised. That's the prayer beads my grandmother used after she prayed. سبحة حبوبتي فيها دعاء ما غاب يا رب احفظ السودان رغم الوجع والعذاب. That's a child who once laughed, now living afraid. Sudanese children don't fear ghosts. They fear the soldiers haunting the street. ما بيخافوا من شبح ولا خيال من المنام. بيخافوا من رصاص ومن زول شايل سلاح قدام. That's more than 1.5 million children starving, dying from hunger, with nothing to eat. جعانين في صمت والصوت ما مسموع. طفل بيموت جوع والعالم واقف مدهوش وركوع. This is a war that doesn't discriminate between killing a child, woman, or man. الحرب دي ما بتحرم لا طفل لا إنسان. بتاكل كل سود في لحظة فقد وحرمان. So don't turn away from our pain when we say, keep eyes on Sudan. I speak today not only as a Sudanese woman, but also as a member of Sudanese Diaspora Network, a community of Sudanese activists, youth, organizers around the world, founded in 2019 after the revolution. After our Sudan revolution, we were inspired and hopeful to become a democratic nation, one that is filled with hope for its youth. We worked as SDN to amplify Sudanese voices, to raise critical humanitarian funds, and support grassroots organizations. And I emphasize this because oftentimes people tend to emphasize the larger NGOs. A lot of these NGOs are the very same ones that pulled out the minute the war broke out in Sudan. So I need everyone to understand the importance of advocating, highlighting, and supporting grassroots organizations. Since our launch 3 years ago, we have raised over 300,000, with 100% of these going to grassroots organizations. And I wanted to start with this so I can let you know that Sudanese youth aren't waiting for the world or for saviors to come and rescue and come and get into Sudan. We are actively doing our part. We just need the rest of the world to continue to do theirs. Bismillah. I want to begin with a question. What does it mean for a country to bleed and the world to look away? Sudan is not a silent crisis. Sudanese people have been screaming, from burning homes, from mass graves, from cities turned to ruins. There is so much bloodshed in Sudan, in Darfur, that it is visible from space. So if Sudan can be seen from space, why does the rest of the world continue to look away? The problem isn't that we as Sudanese people aren't speaking and advocating. The problem is that the rest of the world has decided to not listen. You often see headlines about Sudan, the forgotten war. But I want to ask, who is doing the forgetting? I grew up in Sudan. I was born in Omdurman. I live and breathe Sudan in every day of my life. My family continues to carry Sudan with them, even as we continue to live outside of it. As I speak to my grandmothers, my aunts, my cousins who have been displaced from Sudan to Egypt, there is not a single day that goes by without them expressing the sadness at leaving their home. The very home that I was born, that my mother was born, that my grandmother was born, homes that house generations. The world is not unaware, it is choosing silence. So whenever we say or we read that Sudan is a forgotten war, I want it to be clear. Sudan is not forgotten. Sudan is being ignored, despite our voices, not because of their absence. Sudan isn't invisible, but it is actively made invisible. It's been exactly 3 years since the war erupted in Sudan. On April 15th, 2023, Sudan descended into a violent war. Not a conflict, not clashes, a full-scaled war between two forces. The Sudanese Armed Forces, known as the SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, known as the RSF. This wasn't random, it was a violent collapse of a democratic transition after the revolution that removed the dictator, Omar al-Bashir. Both these generals of the current war, leading the two factions, Burhan from the SAF and Himeti from the RSF, were once allies and now turned guns on each other for a fight for power. And it is Sudanese civilians who are paying for this with their lives, with their blood. Khartoum, Darfur, White Nile, they all became a battlefield. Darfur became a massacre. Homes are turning into graves, hospitals into targets. Since then, between 12 to 14 million people have been displaced, making Sudan the world's largest displacement crisis in the world. I want you all to sit with that for a second. How is a nation that is currently the world's largest displacement crisis, currently the world's most ignored crisis? 25 plus million people are facing hunger, with famine already confirmed in many regions. Sudan is one of the world's largest humanitarian crises on earth today. Let's be clear about what this war looks like. This isn't two armies fighting cleanly outside of cities, outside of civilians' homes, outside of neighborhoods. This is houses that house generations, looted and broken into. My very own home has bullets through the walls, the very same walls that I used to run around, the same backyard that I used to play in as a child, is now full of bullet holes, rubble. My room that I had so many childhood memories in is now full of destruction, completely looted. This isn't a faraway issue. It's not a news title. It's not something that I can separate from myself. This is targeting innocent children, women, men, families. Children are being shot on the street. Women being raped as a weapon of war. Entire villages are being burnt to the ground. In Darfur, we are seeing a devastating violent genocide once again. Massacres in refugee camps by the RSF forces. Ethnic cleansing with the RSF targeting non-Arab communities, and thousands executed in places like Al-Fashir, Darfur. Healthcare in Sudan is collapsing, with over 80% of hospitals no longer functional, and over 200 attacks on medical facilities. This war is not just happening in silos. It's being fueled, armed, and sustained by external powers. The Rapid Support Forces, known as the RSF, is responsible for some of the most brutal violence in this war. Villages in Darfur being burned, communities wiped out. This war is not just about violence, it's about exploitation. The RSF is being funded, armed, and backed through networks of the government of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, which are also being supported by the United States of America, allowing this war to continue while civilians pay the price. Sudan is one of the richest countries. Our gold is being exported. Sudanese blood is are paying the cost of gold. If any of you are familiar with the current gold market in the UAE, it's booming, it's free, it's cheap. And that's not because the UAE has gold mines, it's not because the UAE is rich in that. It's because the UAE, through backing of the RSF, is guaranteeing that funnel of gold to their own country. So every visit to Dubai, every vacation is being paid for through the lives of Sudanese children, men and women. Just a few weeks ago, 17 civilians, the majority of them schoolgirls, were killed in Sudan by a horrific drone, which was struck by the UAE-backed Rapid Support Forces, clearly stating on it that it was manufactured in the UAE. We're no longer in a space where we're guessing whether this is something that is being backed by the UAE, or these are no longer just thoughts that are being put out there. This is recorded. This is clear information that people can access. And yet people continue to support this genocidal government. The US continues to give its support, continues to ensure that their bases are safe by making sure that they have this solidarity with a country that is responsible for the horrific genocide in Sudan, in Palestine, in Gaza. The war in Sudan is not a civil war. And I have to say this over and over again because language matters. Oftentimes, people use civil war as a way to dissuade anyone from understanding what's truly happening in Sudan. And this is rooted in racism, in that aspect that, Sudan is just another African countries. That's just what they do out there. They just fight one another. Sudan is not a civil war. This war is a proxy war. This war is actively continuing because countries are actively gaining from the loss of Sudanese lives. This is a deliberate campaign, a deliberate effort by the UAE to wipe out the Sudanese people. Sudan's suffering is about exploitation. My beloved country, which was once called the breadbasket of the world, had fertile lands that could feed millions and was the world's largest production of Arabic gum, which is used in things such as food, medicine, and cosmetics. And a lot of times when I mention this, people are surprised because truly a lot of people don't understand what a rich country Sudan is. And for that same country to now be in famine, a country that once fed the entire world, to not be able to feed its own people, none of that should be okay. And none of us should be okay about that. Sudan sits on vast gold reserves with tons produced every year. Yet today, most of this wealth is being drained while my people continue to starve. Our gold, which is now controlled by the RSF, being exported to the UAE, is helping to fund the same militias that are slaughtering our people, that are slaughtering innocent children. Fields that once fed nations are being actively burned by the RSF. These are tactics to ensure that Sudanese people are not able to rely on themselves. Because as we know, the minute that a nation has to rely on external powers, it is no longer a nation that can stand on its ground. The war in Sudan is not only confined to Khartoum, which is the capital. In Darfur, and I want to mention this because oftentimes Darfur, within even conversations about Sudan, is left in the dark, is not spoken about. And as a Sudanese woman from the capital, it's very important for me as well to be intentional about not being a part of that erasure. The violence in Darfur is devastating and relentless. Reports of villages like Al Fashir being completely burned to the ground by militias, stores that were vibrant and filled with life, markets, homes, refugee camps. Sudanese people in Darfur are being displaced internally, not once, not twice, but consistently. Spaces that should be considered a safe space, refugee camps, are actively and intentionally being targeted by the genocidal UAE-backed RSF forces. Homes that housed families are being burned and reduced to ashes in a single night. These are homes that once flourished. Imagine our cities here in America. All of a sudden, you no longer see it flourishing and thriving the way you do. And I think a lot of times I try to relate it back because this isn't the norm. It's not like these places have been under destruction. These are people that were regularly going to school like us, going around to play with their friends, children that were able to run around, families living their day to life, going to work. This could have happened to anyone. This isn't something that is normal. This isn't what they're used to. So I want people to understand that what's happening in Sudan, in Darfur, is not the norm for our people. It's not something that they've been living through. This could have been any single one of us. We are just privileged due to a geographical difference. Women in Sudan are being systematically targeted, raped, and abused as weapons of war, while children are forced to flee or to be killed in their own streets. Horrific videos are coming out from the RSF where they're proudly showcasing the way that they're terrorizing these children who are screaming for mercy from a force that knows no mercy, who are proudly stating that they are backed by governments that will do whatever it takes to ensure that Sudanese civilians have no sovereignty of their own, have no freedom, have no justice. They're announcing their crimes. This isn't something that needs investigations. This is something that is very explicit, very clear. Families are torn apart. My very own family has been displaced internally and externally throughout different states of Sudan to Egypt and to Chad. This is a very big and difficult thing because Sudanese community, Sudanese people, we are very communal. I grew up, the idea of nuclear family didn't exist to me because a family wasn't just my mother, my father, and my siblings. It was my grandmothers, my aunts, my cousin. Our home housed 10 plus to 15 different people. These are homes that they were never empty. They never heard silence. There was always kids running around, grandmothers in the kitchen talking, families visiting one another. The aspect of individualism does not exist in Sudan. We are very communal people. And so it's a different heartbreak now for families to be separated from one another, for mothers to be separated from their siblings, from their children, for grandmothers to have to suffer the pain of this war after having lived in homes for years, after having an entire generation live in these homes. That's a different level of emotional pain that I think people don't quite grasp unless they're familiar with Sudanese dynamics, with the way that truly I live and breathe community. I grew up, for me, community was not just a concept. It's something that was ingrained in my very day-to-day life. Going to school, you would have your teachers have extremely close relationships with your parents. You would have their next door neighbor isn't considered a neighbor, that's family. Doors are not closed in Sudan. Doors are open for strangers. For the concept of strangers truly does not exist. My entire neighborhood felt like an extension of my family. During Ramadan, our holy month of fasting, you would see people on the street breaking their fast with those who don't have families or homes to go to. So when I say that this aspect of being separated, of being displaced, it is causing so much emotional distress, physical distress. This is such a big loss. And it's very hard to truly explain that unless you're familiar with the ways that Sudanese families are so ingrained. Markets, schools, and hospitals are being actively destroyed in an attempt to make sure that there is no rebuilding of Sudan. After the 2019 revolution, Sudanese youth, women, men took it upon themselves to create a campaign called Barana Hinabnihu, which means we will rebuild it on our own. And this inspired millions to begin to do rebuilding projects in Sudan, to start to invest in our country. Diaspora outside had come back to Sudan after the revolution to ensure that we are pouring back into our country. So when I say that markets, schools, homes, hospitals are being destroyed, this isn't something that is just happening randomly. This is intentional to make sure that not only is there physical destruction, but there is also that mental destruction for Sudanese youth, for Sudanese women, men, to ensure that there is no hope for them to ever rebuild Sudan. It's to make sure to create a country with people who are devoid of that sense of passion for their country. And despite that, despite the pain, despite the violence, despite the rebel, there are initiatives right now of Sudanese youth who are going back to Sudan, who are working on rebuilding amidst the most horrendous and most difficult of circumstances. This just goes to show you again, Sudanese people are not just victims. We are not just sitting here waiting for help, waiting for a savior. Sudanese people are doing their part, but the international community continues to stay silent, and this silence kills. I want to emphasize the fact that Sudanese people are not helpless. We are not victims. And I think that's important because a lot of times when people paint a narrative of Sudan or Africa in general, it's often this narrative of a poor country, of people who are not educated. And that's just not the case. Sudan's youth has constantly, over and over and over again, continue to show for our country, continue to rebuild, continue to put hope during the most hopeless of times. I want you all to take a moment and imagine a bloodshed that is so heavy that it is visible from space, from satellite imagery. That's not normal. That should never be a headline that we read and we simply move past and go about our day. Had this taken place in the US, this would have been a completely different story. People's reactions, the way that we would have jumped to action, the way that we would have forgotten everything else and demanded that we put an end to this. Yet Sudan has this much devastation that it is visible from space. I've never even seen or can comprehend or imagine a devastation or loss of that level. That is not something that any one of us should be able to simply hear and go about our day. Rivers of violence, of blood, are flowing through my beloved Nile. The same Nile that I used to go to as a child with my friends. We would go swimming, we would go and have picnics by it. Something that was in my memories ingrained as a place of life is now filled with blood, loss, and devastation. This is not just a war. It's a campaign of terror designed to displace, destroy, and exploit Sudan's people, my homeland, my country. Beyond the bombs and the burnt homes, there is a very devastating weapon that is used in this war that is underreported, and that is of sexual violence. Sudanese women and girls have been subjected to horrifying brutality. Human rights groups have documented widespread rape, abduction, and sexual slavery used as tools of terror. Women are being attacked by RSF forces in their homes, on the street, while trying to flee to safety. And the worst part is that they are proudly showcasing these footages online, proudly showcasing this violence. Some of these stories are almost too painful to say out loud. We've interviewed survivors as SDN, women who wanted to speak up despite the pain that it brought them, in hopes that sharing their stories will spark some sense of empathy, will spark an international outrage. They're reliving these terrors to reach the outside world. There's been cases of Sudanese women who, facing the threat of sexual assault, chose to take their own lives rather than endure the violence. Imagine the fear that a woman has to feel in order to reach that moment. Yet there was no international coverage of that. A group of women, 30 women, who chose to take their own lives out of fear of being sexually assaulted. None of this is normal. None of this should be normalized. Imagine the terror that Sudanese people are living under, the destruction of their safety, of their dignity, and the future of their nation. For me, Sudan is not a headline. It's not a news article. It's not an Instagram post or an infographic. Sudan is home. Sudan is Omdurman. It's the smell of tea with milk, which we call shai bil-laban, in the morning, being made by my grandmother. It's the laughter of children playing in the streets and running to our dukan, our local shop, with my cousins. This is the country that I know. It's the beds in every room in case your guests get tired and want to stay longer or choose to stay the night. When I tell people that it's normal for a guest to come visit you, have lunch, have dinner, and then be like, I think I'm gonna stay the night and leave tomorrow, and you're like, yeah, choose any of these beds. They look at me weird, but that really is the culture and the country that I grew up in. Sudanese culture is about hospitality and about giving to others, regardless of what it is that you have. I remember from a young age, my grandmother, Habub Ismiya, ingrained in my mind the importance, the absolute importance of leaving others better than you found them, of giving to those who need it, of making sure that you live a life that centers not your well-being, but centers the wellness of those around you. This is how I grew up in Sudan, and this is how I want to have generations continue to grow up in my country, in my beloved homeland. A country that is full of so much joy, so much laughter, that it breaks my heart to see the absolute devastation, the tears, the violence, and the pain running amongst it right now. The memories that I have of Sudan are now being overshadowed by bombs, hunger, and displacement. I have to constantly look at old photos, look at old journal entries to remind myself that what I'm looking at now, this isn't all there is to know. I constantly speak to people about the beauty of Sudan, about our culture, the richness of it, the vibrant tobe, which is a colorful garment that Sudanese women wear that showcases their love for life, in order to understand, in order to remind myself and explain to others that Sudan is so much more than the violence that we see. That I grew up in a country that was full of poetry, full of life, full of community. And that's the country that I know. These past 3 years feel like a foreign country to me, feel like I'm looking at something that should not exist, that doesn't make sense with the memories that I associate with my homeland, that doesn't make sense with the way that I grew up in my country. Right now, over 25 million people in Sudan are in need of humanitarian assistance, and this is more than half the population. This isn't a political crisis. A lot of times people are afraid or shy to speak about Sudan, saying that I don't know about the politics of it. And I have to remind them, this is a humanitarian crisis. You don't need to have your PhD. You don't need to be someone who is well versed in politics. And I think in this day and age, we need to understand that politics are not separate from humanity. It is not separate from people's day-to-day lives, and it impacts our day-to-day lives. This is a mother that is burying their children. There is a Sudanese mother from White Nile that spoke to us about the pain, the extreme anguish she felt at burying one of her daughters. It's not a story that I can share today, but a lot of these stories, I don't have the words. I can't explain this kind of horror, which is why it's important to listen to Sudanese people, to listen to their stories. These aren't tales. These aren't simply things that are being told to pull out heartstrings. These are lived realities. These are people who are facing extremely, extremely horrific situations that no one should ever experience. And yet these very stories are still continue to be overlooked, are still continue to be dismissed as not important, as not worthy. Sudanese lives are often painted as something that is, you just simply don't need to care about it because it's black bodies that are dying, it's black pain, and a lot of people have been conditioned, especially in the West, to disregard that and to deem it as less worthy and to deem black people, Africans, as people who are simply used to violence, as people who are used to this type of bloodshed and this type of horrific, horrific warfare. And that is simply not true. And that continues to silence what's happening in Sudan, that continues to allow for Sudanese lives to face these horrific situations, and that continues to put Sudan in a place where no one is speaking, no one is paying attention, and no one is advocating for Sudanese people. This is happening in real time. And yet, where is the outrage? Where are the headlines? Where are the emergency summits? We see how the world can mobilize for other crises. But Sudan is treated as disposable. Even after the mass killings, systematic sexual violence, entire cities wiped out, the global response has been minimal, delayed, and honestly completely inadequate. This is not accidental. This is political, because Sudanese lives are not valued in the global order. Let me bring this back to the people, because oftentimes we hear numbers, we hear statistics, and this can numb us. Sudan currently has stories of mothers burying their children, families walking for days, leaving their home, being displaced with nothing to eat, nothing to drink. Family members are not choosing what to eat, they're choosing who to feed. Imagine being a parent or being a child and having to choose between which one of my family members realistically is going to survive and that I can give what little I have to ensure their survival, knowing that the survival of one child means the burying of another. And this isn't one, two, three, or 10 stories. These are thousands of stories like this. We have team members on ground who are speaking to thousands of families, stories that absolutely break your heart, that bring you so much pain. The fact that this can exist in the same world where we're throwing out mass amounts of food, where we're so caught up in our consumerism that we don't realize that families are truly eating. There are Sudanese families that are forced to eat completely inedible things just in order to get by. This is something that should break every single one of our hearts. Generations of homes are being turned to ash. And this is something that is devastating, given the fact that Sudanese families that are being displaced are making their way back to Sudan, who are not able to create a lifestyle outside of it, only to come back to broken homes with nothing that they can rebuild with. Entire histories are being completely wiped out. The RSF has looted our Sudan museum, a museum that had rich, incredible history of the Merowe pyramids. A lot of people are not aware that Sudan's pyramids, fun fact, are actually more than Egypt. And our pyramids, our historical sites are being destroyed in order to ensure that people don't see Sudan as a rich nation, as a nation of history. These same artifacts can be seen in the UAE, showing Sudanese history in a country that is completely active in the genocidal destruction of that country. But Sudan is not just suffering. Sudan is resisting. We saw it in 2019, a revolution that was led by the people, not led by outside forces, not backed by outside forces. In fact, the United States wasn't in favor of the Sudanese revolution, but we, the youth, the women, the men of Sudan, were able to oust a dictator, were able to spark hope in our country. And even now, grassroots organizations are feeding communities. Diasporas, networks are working to raise thousands and millions of dollars to pour back into Sudan. Ordinary people are still surviving the unimaginable. So I want to end with this. If imperialism thrives on silence, then our responsibility is to be loud. If this war is fueled by global systems, then solidarity must also look global. We must demand an end to foreign funds of armed militias of the RSF, a boycott of the UAE, humanitarian access without restriction, and sustained attention, not just moments of outrage, and an uplifting of Sudanese voices. If we do nothing, history will remember our silence. The people in Sudan have done everything that they could, and now it's our turn. Thank you.
I'm so grateful to have a colleague in Tim who recognizes the importance of highlighting the genocide in Sudan as part of this conference. And I'm intensely grateful as both a scholar and as a Black woman to have borne witness to your testimony. It was intensely personal. It was exceptionally informative. And I can't imagine that all of us are going to leave here not thinking more about what we've heard and understanding just how important it is for us to take action. We might talk more about this in a moment, but I'm also very grateful that you also address why it is such an undercovered and such an under-discussed conflict. So I just want to say again, as a scholar, I'm grateful, but personally, I'm very grateful. So thank you so much.
How might the war that's being waged against Sudan be prosecuted? How can those responsible be held to account when so many institutions are complicit, are not just complicit, but actively profiteering off the destruction of Sudan? What changes does the speaker seeing as necessary, not just for the violence to stop, but to make sure that it's addressed properly after it is stopped?
So first question is about what line do you see for potential prosecution?
So I think the very first and important thing that needs to be done is breaking the silence. Without that, there will be no prosecution, there will be no awareness, and there will be no sense of justice that needs to be done. Sudanese communities activists have begun a movement of Keep Eyes on Sudan. You can find information on that through Instagram, through pages, diaspora groups, and local grassroots, local efforts. Their first demand is for people to speak up about what's happening in Sudan while simultaneously calling out the actors. A lot of times people don't call out the RSF as being backed by the UAE out of fear of that. And so I think that, again, language matters. This is not passive. This isn't a violence that is erupting on its own. Like I mentioned, it's not a civil war. So language and language that is properly done, speaking about Sudan, but also speaking about the actors. The UAE is one of the biggest actors that is currently responsible for the war in Sudan. And this constant channeling and funding of weapons to the RSF is what's creating the longevity of the war, is what is causing Sudanese men, women, children to face this violence, this destruction. So without one, speaking about Sudan, raising awareness and amplifying Sudanese voices, you are not going to be able to learn about what's happening in Sudan. Two, without naming the actors, without calling the RSF for what they are, without naming the horrific actions being done by the UAE, the way that they are actively enforcing and ensuring that this war continues, then we'll see no change were to happen.
I believe that answered all the questions, but if there's something that we neglected.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the audience?
Oh, let me bring
We
it.
just need the mic.
I don't think that we heard about you or what, are you a student of ASU?
I was a student of ASU, yes. I
Okay.
graduated from here with.
Okay, that explains it, because there is apparently a Sudanese, which I didn't know, I just found out. There is a Sudanese organization on campus. Why aren't they here? Would be very interesting to see those people. Is also the head of Sudanese, the Sudanese studies in the United States used to be here. He's now deceased. His widow is still here, and she teaches Arabic kind of literature, culture, and so forth. So it's amazing that ASU actually has been quite involved, and I would like to figure out ways, you can talk about it later, how we can really get people more involved and more informed. So that's just a comment. My other question is, can you tell us more about the politics of this area beside the UAE? Who else is involved? What are, if you had a map or a map that you can, or a PowerPoint that you can share with us? Who are the playing factors? Who is involved? Who is gaining what? What's the politics? What do they expect to gain? We heard some of it about UAE, but there's more to it, right?
Yes. So I will start by saying that I'm not a political analyst, so I'm not able to give you in details the extreme factions and how they're all in it. I will say my work focuses more on the humanitarian aspect of Sudan and on the UAE involvement, and that's because the UAE is the biggest actor. So there are Sudanese activists and political analysts who can, and I'm more than happy to share resources perhaps and have you send it out to everyone and you can read more into the political aspect of it. And that's something that I think SDN, Sudanese Diaspora Network, as well as a few other Sudanese organizations, they do highlight a lot of what the other nations are benefiting from it, how other countries are involved. My focus is more within the people of Sudan, the humanitarian aspect of it, as well as calling out the biggest investor in this war, which is the UAE. So I'd be more than happy to share that with you afterwards. I just don't want to share something that I don't have as much knowledge of.
Good question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
It's a two-part question. The first one is if beyond raising awareness, if we want to take action to like ask our representatives to support something or not support something, are there specific asks that like, ways that our government can make a difference? What are the specific asks?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that actually. So there is a page called Decolonize Sudan. A lot of these spaces that we have are catered towards action points. One of the action points being keeping eyes on Sudan, which is spreading awareness about what's happening, calling for a boycott to the UAE, as well as making sure that a lot of times when people are asking in terms of humanitarian assistance, where can I donate? Which organizations can I donate to? We have verified organizations that are working with grassroots efforts in Sudan. Because Sudan is one of the world's biggest humanitarian crisis, one of the biggest needs is humanitarian aid. So the United States had completely cut off aid to USAID and a few organizations that used to be in Sudan. So this puts the responsibility on Sudanese grassroots organizations to get that work in. I think a misconception that people have is that bigger organizations or bigger NGOs are more trustworthy or more safe to donate to rather than Sudanese grassroots organizations. And that's simply not true. A lot of these very same big NGOs are the first ones that pulled their teammates out of the ground, out of Sudan when the war broke out. I think humanitarian assistance is a big action point, whether it's being able to donate, share these efforts, or tap into your circles who are looking for ways to help Sudan. We can't ignore the financial aspect of it, which is that people need to eat. People need to have safety. This costs money. Sudan is not funded by huge global humanitarian aids. So I think from my personal perspective, it's number one, ensuring that there is no silence around Sudan, speaking on it. Number two, actively calling for a boycott of the UAE. Number three, uplifting Sudanese voices. This is so important because people in Sudan, not only voices in the diaspora, but one thing about uplifting Sudanese voices is you're able to get these testimonies, these stories, and what people in Sudan need. And a way you can do that is by connecting to Sudanese orgs. And that's something that I'd be more than happy to provide these resources, who you can follow, who you can connect with. Trusted organizations like SDN, where we've been working for more than 5 years with grassroots orgs in Sudan, same organizations that are now actively providing humanitarian aid in Sudan as the war is going on. And these are completely volunteer run. People in Sudan, they're facing difficulties, are part of these same organizations that are helping others. And they are completely accessible. It's easy to find information about that. If you're truly interested in getting that, I would be more than happy to just compile that list and to share it with all of you.
And my second part of the question was what a boycott would entail outside of not traveling to the UAE. I imagine the same site you referenced, the Decolonize Sudan, would have those suggestions.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
I can ask a question perhaps while we're waiting for.
Yeah, and I can ask a question or make more of a comment. Like, And I think you identified some really important, like lazy racist tropes, right, with Africa. We see this not only with Sudan, saw it with Rwanda, DRC, what our consumerism does with it, devices like that. And then also, international law, it's the best thing we got, but it's doesn't work in many instances. And William Shabas spoke here last year, and his book, The International Legal Orders, Color Line, Racism, Racial Discrimination, and the Making of International Law was very eye-opening. And I think we can see the legacies of this, especially when we try to confront this. And it's just the greed and consumerism, right? Like how this feeds this, and then the West, in the broadest term, falls back on these lazy tropes. Like, as you said, it's Africa, people fight. This is what they do, without looking at the colonial histories and what drives these conflicts and who actually benefits, right? Like when you follow the money. And I think this is important for all of us. Like you said, when you have sites of massacre that you can see from space, I think we should all be reflecting on that and how we participate in this and what we can actually do. So, and that was one of the most powerful survivor testimonies I've ever heard. So thank you.
Thanks. One question I have, and this kind of dovetails something that both of you have mentioned, which is as people of color or marginalized peoples don't get the kind of attention that they might deserve as fellow human beings. Another marginalized group, as you have also mentioned, that often doesn't get enough attention are women, and the fact that women are often sexually violated. And that's not just an ancillary or side part of a conflict. It actually can be weaponized as part of the conflict. And so I'm a scholar of religion, so I'm a genocide scholar, but I'm trained as a religious ethicist. And I was wondering, and you also mentioned, as we know, even though the overarching reason isn't a religious war, is that it is an aspect of part of the conflict. And so do you see women using their resources as practicing Muslims, or do you even see those who are doing the targeting of women using religion in any way to inform how they are actually targeting and violating women? Or do you even see women using their faith as a way of trying to cope in the aftermath of these violent violations?
Absolutely. So I think in Sudan, it is less so of that and more so of ethnic targeting.
Right.
So Sudan is very ethnically diverse, and a lot of times there is a specific and intentional targeting of Arab non-ethnic groups. And so in Darfur, which in West Sudan, you see that women are being targeted due to their ethnicities and due to a sense of, again, colorism also plays a role in Sudan. And so a lot of times you'll have in the RSF factions a targeting of women that are coming from darker tones from different ethnicities that they deem as to not be worthy. So a lot of times there is that internal ethnic factions that is being fueled and that is being constantly uplifted through the RSF, which is the army, Sudanese armies. Before the RSF and the SAF had completely separated, the army was feeding into this RSF sense of superiority. And so when you're having, and this was something that obviously is going to create a divide and a sense of which lives matter more than the others. And so when you have ethnic groups, African ethnic groups that are being long before the war dismissed, overlooked, violently attacked, and seen as a group that is less worthy of life, when something like a war comes in, the faction of the RSF is now actively acting upon those ideas that were implemented in them by the dictator Omar al-Bashir, by his military. And this is something that, like, again, it weaponizes women a lot of times in a society. We all know that, women build societies, women create homes, they create systems, they create families, they create neighborhoods. So the RSF's targeting of women is from an ethnic place, but it's also from a place of ensuring the destruction of a nation by ensuring the destruction of its women.
Thank you. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
thank you
question.
very much for this very powerful testimony. I know it's very hard to get in front of an audience and speak about these issues. My question relates to a paper that we heard yesterday that raised a lot of interesting questions about aid organizations. In that context, it was about aid organizations in Vichy, France. And it raised a lot of questions about when does aid and support become complicit? and what's happening. And so I know in the case of Sudan, Women's Refugee Commission is very active in support. The Plan International is another very active NGO that is supporting women refugees, especially in Sudan. And my question for you as a humanitarian activist is how do you separate good intentioned Western aid organizations and their support and from when they become when you become overly reliant on them, or they're fostering more dependence on Western organizations? In your mind, where's the line?
Absolutely. I think it's a very important question. And this is why I always emphasize the importance of investing in grassroots organizations. Sudanese grassroots organizations and aiding them and assisting them is different from investing in a NGO that is Western backed. Because these organizations, number one, they've been there long before the war. They understand what Sudanese people's needs are, and their focus is not only on temporary relief, but like I said, building up the country. The movement "Bara Nahna Bnihu," or "We will rebuild it on our own," is ingrained in these local grassroots organizations, where it's not only about putting a band-aid on what's currently happened, but it's investing in the infrastructure. You have Sudanese ERRs who are nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. I don't know how many people even heard of that, but these ERRs they're not a foreign Western NGO. These are Sudanese-based grassroots organizations that have created a system of helping Sudanese families displaced internally in Sudan purely through Sudanese volunteers. And these groups were recognized to the point of given a Nobel Peace Prize, which it's sad to say that Western recognition is needed for a group to be seen as valid. But a lot of times, for a lot of people, Westerners, that is what they need. So, for example, we work with an organization called "Bara Nahna Bnihu." This organization, I've worked firsthand with them on ground back in 2019. We're part of the initial effort to rebuild Sudan and are now part of the efforts to provide humanitarian assistance. But if I were to come and speak about "Bara Nahna Bnihu" or even SDN, our org, which is a 501c3, and someone were to come and speak about the Red Cross, they're gonna be like, "Oh, but the Red Cross is known. Shouldn't I donate to that?" No, because oftentimes this aid doesn't actually reach the people. Especially right now in Sudan, there's so much blockade and so much different obstacles in terms of how aid can reaches. You need to work with people on ground, grassroots organizations who, by the way, didn't just emerge after this war. These are orgs that have been working on rebuilding Sudan. So they're, number one, familiar with the needs of the people. They are Sudanese people. They know their country and they know the systems and the way that it takes to maneuver them. This is why I really want to emphasize the importance of straying away from this mindset of donating and only advocating and only validating the big organizations, the big NGOs. Because like I said, these very same NGOs were the first ones to pull out of the war when war erupted, leaving Sudanese grassroots orgs behind to do the work. So if that doesn't show you the importance of investing in Sudanese grassroots orgs, of giving them that validation, they've been doing incredible humanitarian work. Our org, Sudanese Diaspora Network, a registered 501c3, we worked with 6 different organizations and we're adding on to them. One of them, the Sudanese American Physicians Association, SAPA. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. They do an annual conference here in the US. They speak about their work. Everything is on paper, everything is valid. So I think we just need to do a little bit of a shift from that aspect of, mistrusting grassroots orgs and only amplifying big, larger NGOs, because the reality is they don't always know what's best for what people's needs are. It is temporary. And like you mentioned, it creates this dependency and it's not sustainable. And Sudanese people are not looking just simply to be rescued. We're not seeking for a savior. We are working on rebuilding our country. Like, yes, there is an immediate humanitarian aid, and that's so important to invest in that, but it's important to invest in the right places. It's not simply about donating to an organization because it's a big name and it's well known. It's about donating to an organization that will, number one, the aid will reach the people, an organization that understands what the people need, and an organization that is invested in the rebuilding of the nation.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I was saying,
Please wrap it.
oh, no, yes, I was going to say we're at time. And I just wanted to also highlight, we were talking about this earlier, For those of you who actually are interested in learning more, not only in perhaps rewatching this once it's available online, but actually some of you are probably familiar with National Public Radio, with NPR, and there is a podcast called Code Switch, and supposed to come out today. So if not today, probably in the next couple of days, is actually a panelist talk about why is it that the violence, the genocide in Sudan is not receiving the attention that it should. And I'm sure it will probably hit on some of these same issues of racism, same issues of complicity. So if you're interested in learning even more, I would encourage you to do that. But I just want to thank you again for sharing your time with us, and thank those who are here in the room and online.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a 15-minute break and resume with our, we have a standalone speaker, Professor Maureen Hebert, who will be zoomed in from Calgary, Alberta, my home province. And Professor Hebert will be speaking on technology and genocide. So 15-minute break.